شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين فمحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين المكرمين الخيرين الفاضلين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're continuing our discussion in a series entitled The Successful Mu'min. After establishing a base of our usul ad-din, right, our fundamental beliefs, once we start acting upon our belief system, right, going from Muslim to mu'min, then we need to figure out how is it that we can take our level of iman to higher places. How can we increase our iman? We said that one place that we can find this in the Holy Quran is in chapter 23, right? Surah Al-Mu'minun. So right in the beginning, Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Absolutely, without a doubt, already the mu'mineen, the believers, have become successful. And thereafter, Allah lists various different traits that these successful mu'mineen possess. So our first discussion was about the concept of success itself. We said, originally, we take a look at the meaning of falh and falah, and we see how it has to do with success. And it gives us a better picture of what it means. So falh and falah originally meant those who were involved in farming, when they would cut and plow and till and cultivate land. We said, what does this have to do with the word success then, as it's changed over time? We said that this farmer basically gives us this 5-point plan for success, right? They start off with a vision and goal. They have an initial method that they have to research, that they have to implement in order to achieve that goal. Then they make sure to do the actual work. They start it off. They maintain that work over time, watching over everything, making sure nothing destroys it. And finally, at the end, they're finally able to harvest that crop, right? And reap and sow the rewards based on what they've planted. So because of this kind of 5-step plan that a farmer engages in, them going through all of this leads to success. So we said in the same way, we can think of a plan for us and how we can achieve success as well. The last point we mentioned last night was regarding the different types of success. Namely, you have worldly success, and then you have spiritual success. So we said, what is the difference? We mentioned 4 qualities of what is it when somebody is looking for worldly success, materialistic success. Success in the dunya. The first, we'll mention them all. We said it's baqa, ghina, izzah, and ilm. That they're looking for something to remain. They're looking for independence. They're looking for power, glory, and honor, and they want knowledge and information. Right? This is normally what people look for when they're going after anything in the world. Right? Now we said, okay, well, what's the difference between these qualities, and which are found in worldly success, and qualities found within spiritual success? So for every single one of these qualities, the same thing exists within the spiritual world too. So you need the same thing. You need baqa, you need ghina, you need izzah, and you need ilm. All of those things, right? You need that for something to remain. You need independence, you need power and glory, and you also need knowledge. But for worldly success, there's no conditions there. For spiritual success, there's a condition for each and every one of these. So for example, for the spiritual success, you want baqa bila fana. You want something to remain, but without fana, without annihilation. You want it to eternally remain. Now anything that remains over here, anything that we go after here, for example, wealth, any wealth that you attain obviously has its endpoint. You can't take it with you to the grave. Whereas in the spiritual world, for spiritual success, when you're looking for something to maintain and continue itself, you want it to never go away, right? You want it to be eternal and immortal. The second was what? Ghina, independence. So the condition here in spirituality is that you want ghina bila faqr. You want independence without having to have any sort of need and poverty whatsoever. You see, the independence that we might find in this world, you can obtain it. Maybe, for example, you're a businessman or a businesswoman, so you have an independent income coming in. But you still will have to deal with, let's say, poverty when you first start off your business. Or if the market goes down, you'll experience some poverty. So you don't actually have full independence, right? You're still conditional upon external factors. But for spiritual success, the ghina that you are looking for, that you obtain, is independence, and you never have to experience true poverty. Right? And sometimes you see that individuals who truly understand that they're independent of worldly needs, even when it comes to money, right? Whatever they have, whatever Allah grants them, whatever is in the rizq, they're happy with it. They don't feel a need, they never feel that they're actually impoverished. And that's why even now, when we see in this world, the individuals in this society, right, in the Western world, are usually much, much unhappier, much more depressed, and much more anxious and stressed out, even with all the wealth that people here possess. But when you look at places in the third world, where economically they're not doing so well, you see that the stress levels are much lower. The anxiety levels are much lower. And the level of happiness is much higher. So there is no necessary correlation between happiness and wealth in that sense. So sometimes people can be happy with that little amount of wealth because they feel independent from that need of wealth. The third was izzah and power or honor or glory. So that's what you look for in the world, in worldly gains. In the spiritual gains, you want izzah bila dhul. You want this power and glory and fame, but you don't want any sort of humility. You don't want to be disgraced at all. See, no matter how much fame, power, and glory you gain in this world, you'll always find enemies, and you'll always find somebody to disgrace you. All right? Even you can think of the most, let's say, wealthy and famous individuals right now. People always want to quote people like, let's say, Steve Jobs, right? Great success story. But then, of course, they bring down his name and his dignity when they mention certain things that happen within the Apple workplace. How he would mistreat his workers or abuse them, or what would happen as far as sweatshops and how these phones were actually being built, right? So no matter what, when it comes to the world, there's always something that can bring you down. But in spiritual success, there is absolutely nothing that can bring you down. When you're actually going for what is spiritually true, what is spiritually valuable, no one can actually bring down your dignity, right? Because you know that izzah, that power, that honor, that glory that you achieved was from Allah. So even when the prophets and imams were being harassed by people, it didn't bring down their izzah and glory, right? It didn't bring down their fame level at all. And the final one was what? Was ilm, knowledge. So yeah, there's knowledge you can attain for worldly pleasures and worldly success. But when it comes to the spiritual world, for spiritual gains and for spiritual success, we want ilm bila jahl. You want knowledge without any sort of ignorance. And this is probably one of the most difficult things to obtain. See, right now, any sort of information that we try to achieve, anything that we obtain and go after, as far as knowledge is concerned, especially if it's empirical, scientific, materialistic information, it's going to be limited. There's a limit to every sort of science that we go after, right? No matter how many studies you go through, how much medical or scientific literature you go through, there's going to be a limit. And we see throughout history, science has constantly has had to change itself over and over and over again, right? With one model of the universe, a new model, then these new theories come up. You have this classical theory of physics, for example, right? Newtonian physics, then it changes to Einsteinian physics, which is general relativity, then you go to special relativity, and now you're in the world of quantum physics and mechanics. And who knows how long that'll last. So constantly, they think that they have information, but there's always ignorance alongside it, and they can't get rid of that. But for spiritual success, and a spiritual quality of knowledge is that there's no jahl there too. There's nothing that brings you into darkness. So when we connect ourselves with Allah, this is true knowledge. There's no jahl there at all. There's no attempt, there's no possibility that Allah doesn't exist. The way that we understand our connection to Allah, the way that we connect ourselves with the Ahlul Bayt, the way that we connect ourselves with the reality is based on real ideas. It's based on fundamental, true ideas. We don't have these doubts, or we shouldn't have these doubts in the system. And if we truly go ahead and research this with the goal in mind of obtaining this spiritual success, then this will truly give us that knowledge that can't go away, that has no ignorance. We get power and fame without being disgraced and being humiliated. We get independence without experiencing poverty. And we'll have this remain with us beyond this world until the next world. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraj. Now let's take this and go back to the practical side, right? We're talking about worldly success versus spiritual success. Now maybe you might think, okay, based on what was mentioned, maybe I'm not after fame, I'm not after money and power, I'm not after status. I think I'm a fairly spiritual person. I'm looking for spiritual success, not worldly success. Now sometimes we might be, quote unquote, religious, pious individuals, but the actual way that we interact with the world might actually be worldly. It might be the case that we're practicing Muslims. We might be mu'mineen, but the way that we actually go about our daily routines, the way that we talk to one another, and especially the way that we talk to our children is actually a materialistic way of dealing with them. We set them up sometimes for worldly success and think that it'll lead to their spiritual success. Let me give some examples. If you remember, we gave this narration which was attributed both to the sixth Imam and the Prophet, right? Where they say, رَأْسُ كُلِّ خَطِيَّةٍ حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا, that the beginning and the inception and the source of every single problem and sin is حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا, is love and attachment to the world. So what does that mean practically? Well, let's talk first about the way parents themselves can affect their children. So many people might think that, especially as we discussed a few nights ago, right? We were talking about mental health issues, if you remember. So for a long time, in the mental health community and literature, it was understood that mental health issues and problems were genetic things. That because of a chemical imbalance that's been passed down, because of some sort of interaction, these genes passed down, recessive, dominant, whatever it was, and this is how a person might have developed stress, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, whatever. They thought it was something purely genetic. Then later on, especially when it came to those who study and major and focus on early developmental childhood psychology, they said a lot of this sort of anxiety, stress, all these mental health issues that come about, let's say in the teenage years or in the adult years, were actually because of trauma that the children face themselves. And it was actually learned behavior from their parents. They learned from their parents how to be anxious. They learned from their parents to stress out over things. They learned from their parents to, let's say, lose their temper in places when they shouldn't, right? They were being oversensitive in places where they shouldn't have been sensitive at all. So modern day mental health literature says a lot of this behavior has been learned and it wasn't genetically passed down. Now let's think of a typical way that some parents will inculcate and speak to their children. Even with good intentions, they might say these things, right? When they go to school, what do they say? And sometimes what do we say? I want you to get good grades. Now you might say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, let's think about this for a second, right? I want you to get good grades. So what's the point of getting good grades? Right? Your child might respond and ask, why do you want me to get good grades? Get good grades, be successful in school so that you can get, what's the reason? To get a good job, right? You graduate, you go to a good college. Why a good college? Why study there? So you can get a good job. Well, why should I get a good job? Why? Oh, yeah, two things, right? To get married and for money. Both of those things technically go hand in hand, right? Because they'll say, look, if you as a husband, as a provider, don't make any money, nobody's going to marry you. So you need to make sure you make money so that the other women will even bother looking at you or considering you in the first place. Otherwise, all those other traits that you put in your profile, they're all looking past that, right? They jump right to job description. Or at least that's what their parents tell them to do. Because on the other side, what happens is they say, make sure when you marry somebody, make sure they're successful, make sure they're rich, make sure they're stable, right? These are the kind of buzzwords that are used. So again, you might be thinking, well, Hassan, what's wrong with that? Why wouldn't we want these things? Don't you want don't you want your children to get good grades, to then get a good job, go to a good school, make good money, and then marry somebody that's successful and stable? It sounds nice, but what are we really setting these kids up for? What are we really saying and telling them about success? We're really saying that success, your whole life, is based on materialistic and worldly factors. Now let me quote a study that was done in San Diego University. The psychology department did this. They wanted to examine the difference in approach to things that are stressors, that lead to stress, which lead to anxiety and depression. From today, in comparison to what happened between people coming out of college in the 60s and 70s. So they took a look at people going into college and coming out of college in the 60s and 70s, and they also surveyed people around like these ages. Call them, I guess, millennials, if you will, right? So this is what they found. They said in the 60s and 70s, the main cause to go into college and to come out, their main hopes and desires and what would cause them stress were these kind of philosophical, moral, ethical questions. They would say, look, I'm going into college. My fear is that I don't become a better person. My hope and desire is that I learn something about myself and I come out a better individual. I hope that I come out like this after college, that I learn more about myself and I learn more about the world. I become a better human being. So that was their hopes, their fears, and desires. Now fast forward to what happens to kids before going into college today and then leaving college. The same thing. What leads to their stress, anxiety, and depression? So I'm not sure if I'll get accepted. I'm not sure if the school is good. I'm not sure if I'll get the best grades. I'm not sure if I'll have enough money. I'm not sure if, not the job part of it, that's one part. I'm not sure if I'll be able to make enough money to pay off my student loans. This is what was leading to their stress. Nothing about character building, nothing about ethical traits, nothing about morality, nothing about philosophy, nothing about understanding the world. You see the huge difference here? Is even though there was some, let's say, stressors for those 30, 40, 50 years ago, they were interested in building themselves up spiritually. Whereas today, the focus of people is what? Is trying to get all these materialistic things. And this is why we see that even in a first world country, quote unquote, people are stressing out about their day-to-day life. Even those who are successful are still stressing out about this. And when we train our children in the same way, that's also going to lead to their stress. I've seen many kids in communities, in high school, right, 15, 16, stressing out. I'm not sure if I'm going to get a good college. Like, you're 15 or 16, what are you worried about? You should be worry-free right now. But what are they stressed out about? And even now, they say that teenagers and preteens are having mental health issues. And they're being stressed out and going through depression and anxiety because of what's happening what could happen in the future. This never happened before. This never happened that preteens and teenagers felt this kind of extreme anxiety and depression. Right? This is something that's been passed down because of various economic issues, and again, because of parents expressing their own fears and anxieties toward their children. So this is something that we need to be careful of. Now look at the other side. So on one side, a worldly individual, somebody looking for worldly success, will speak to their children in terms of get good grades, get a good job, make money, and then marry somebody. Make sure you have enough money to marry somebody that's rich, or make sure you make enough money so that somebody will marry you. Now, look at what somebody could do or would do if they were looking at spiritual success instead of just worldly success. Instead of saying, get good grades, they say, I want you to learn something in school. Even if your grades are not that good, just make sure you learn something. Somebody going for an exam, right? You're about to go into an exam. What would you rather have? Would you rather make a dua, and would you rather ask Allah to get a 100, an A on the exam, or would you rather understand and learn that information? Even if that means maybe you don't pass the exam. Your answer will determine whether you're a worldly, successful type of person or a spiritual, successful type of person. So that's grades. Become more curious. Think critically about the world. Ask questions. That's what I want from you. Even if you get C's and B's, that's okay. That's no problem. But as long as you become a good individual while you're learning from your teachers, that's what matters to me. Imagine saying that as a parent. Imagine if we heard that from our parents when we were younger. What kind of effect that could have had on us. Then we say on one side, somebody who's looking for worldly success will say to their children, get a good job. Whereas somebody who's looking for spiritual success will say, whatever it is, do a good job. Whatever job you have, just make sure you do it with sincerity. Make sure you have Allah in mind. If you become, let's say you work in sanitation, maybe you're a driver, maybe you're a cook, maybe you're a doctor, engineer, lawyer, maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're just a cashier at Walmart. As long as you put your heart and soul into it, that's what matters. Right? Take any job you want, it's okay. As long as you're there and you're sincere about it, you work hard, that's what matters. You see, the message there is much different than get a good job. What was the next point? Is making money. So one person might say, make money. That's what will determine your success in the world. Somebody looking for spiritual success will say, look, if you make money, say Alhamdulillah. That's the risk that Allah has given to you and proportioned for you. If you don't, then Alhamdulillah, Allah has something else written for you. Don't worry, we'll take care of you. We're your parents, we'll always be there for you. The community will be there to help you out if you need them. If you do make money, make sure you're not neglecting people in the community that need money as well. Make sure you're also giving these things out. You see, there's a whole different approach when you're talking about money, worldly versus spiritual. And the final one was what? On one side it was make money so that somebody will marry you because you're successful, because that's the trait they're looking for, your wealth. And then on the female side it was make sure you marry somebody who's rich and successful and stable. That's the worldly side. What's the spiritual side? I say, look, marry somebody that is spiritually wealthy. Marry somebody that has taqwa. If they don't have a good job, quote unquote, or if they're not as educated, that's okay. Because your job in this world is to raise good children or to help one another get closer to Allah. You can't get, their job may not help you do that. They could be, again, get 6-figure, 7-figure salary. If they don't have taqwa, do you really want that kind of marriage to take place? And as any parent could think deep down, if you had a potential spouse, somebody who was interested in your child, and they were, let's say, financially, worldly successful, but they had certain qualities which you knew are, let's say, sketchy qualities. They had the success, but they also, I'm not talking about simple things like praying and fasting, right? That's not easy, but those are simple things to look at. But let's just say they have spiritual diseases and issues, right? Maybe they have a short temper. Maybe they're impatient. Maybe they don't care about raising their children in an Islamic household. Maybe they don't care about bringing their kids to the masjid in the center to learn. All these things matter. On the other side, you say, look, there's somebody that's interested in you. They come from a very God-fearing, muttaqi family. Yeah, they don't have, let's say they're not wealthy, but the family's very kind, they're very generous, they help out in the community and they volunteer. Right? And whenever they do have wealth, they help out other individuals. So when you actually think clearly and weigh these two options out, you should want the spiritual side, not the physical, materialistic, worldly side. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let me bring two narrations to underscore this point. The first one is attributed to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Which is reported in Al-Khisal of Shaykh al-Saduq, rahmatullah alayh. The narration says, الرغبة في الدنيا تكثر الهم والحزن. رغبة في الدنيا, right? Desiring, longing, wishing for, and hoping for the dunya will increase your amount of ham and huzn, right? This depression and stress and anxiety. Why is that the case? It's simple. Because we get stressed out and anxious over what? Over things that are not in our control, right? If we can't get control over it, if we can't control that thing, we get stressed out and anxious, right? Like let's say your child is playing somewhere, right? And they're doing something which is semi-dangerous. You start to, as a parent, stress out and get anxious a little bit, right? Because you don't want them to get hurt. And you can't control that there. They may get hurt. So your heart starts to beat a little bit, right? And you take them away from that situation so that they don't get hurt. Now, if you knew that they were in a situation where they wouldn't get hurt at all, then you'd be stress-free, wouldn't you? So the dunya is all of these factors that we can't control. We have no say in the dunya whatsoever. We don't have a say on what other people will do to us or what will happen to us here. We don't really have a say. If you go after that dunya, you can never catch it. The dunya is always after us, and we shouldn't be going after it. That's why it leads to all this stress and anxiety. As we said, the worldly type of individual is looking for things to be in his hands all the time. You want things to remain, but the dunya goes away. Your money will go away, your power will go away, beauty will go away, fame will go away. These things can't last, they won't last. That's the definition of the dunya. What's on the other side? وَالزُّهْدْ فِي الدُّنْيَا يُرِيحُ الْقَلْبِ وَالْبَدَنِ. When you have this detachment, this zuhd from the dunya. Not that you can't have things, you can have stuff. You can have a nice car and family and house, you can have all those things, it's great. As long as it doesn't own you. You have to own the things, don't let them own you. When you have this zuhd in dunya, this zuhd, this detachment from the dunya, what happens? يُرِيحُ الْقَلْبِ وَالْبَدَنِ. both your heart and your body, your soul and your body are at ease. Right? You just feel like you don't feel stressed out anymore. For example, right? If I were to stress over this phone, right? If I was really, really attached to this and it fell down, and I'd freak out because I'd have that attachment. Oh my God, did the glass break? What happened? Did it get scratched? This and that, right? But if I don't care as much, we'll see what happens. Okay, I stressed out a little bit. Okay. So that obviously means I have some things to work on. But if I don't care about these little things happening, then that means that I have no stress in my life, right? I'm detached from this, so I have nothing to worry about. The more, sorry, okay, now this phone is freaking out too. Sorry. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When you don't put it on airplane mode, phones get attached to mic systems. That's what happens. So when you detach yourself, because why? Why would you detach yourself from the dunya? Again, it's the opposite of what we said. You attach yourself because you want things in your hand. You want that power. You want that knowledge. You want that money, that wealth. You want all this. Allah says, look, I'll give it to you, but I'll give you the real stuff. You want the real deal. I'll give you the one that won't go away. That stuff you can't have here because the dunya doesn't have the space for it. The simplest example, right? People want to be able to have, let's say, this pleasure and enjoyment in, let's say, eating and drinking, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is what happens? You take one bite, it's good, and then it goes away. So what do you have to do? Well, you take another bite. And it's good, but it's never as good as that first bite, right? Especially if that cake is really good. So what happens is you take a third bite, and a fourth, and a fifth. You're always looking for that exact same feeling that you had in the beginning, but it never comes back. And this is usually what happens to those who are addicted to any sort of drug. Well, not even just drugs, but anything, even caffeine, right? That same high, that same boost and feeling that you had in the beginning, you're looking to replicate that all the time. And you can't do it. The dunya doesn't allow it. But what happens when we, inshallah, all get to heaven? That feeling of eating and pleasure there lasts forever. That's why even there, Allah says, look, if you want to have alcohol, then fine. Just wait a couple of years, or 10 years, or 20, whenever you die, I'll give you some over there. But the drinks over there, they'll increase your intellect. The problem with the drinks over here is that they screw up your intellect. Just wait a little while, and I'll give you some good stuff for you, right? If we understand the reality of this world and the next world, then we'll know which things we should be going after. We'll know which things make sense and which things don't. Which things that we should attach ourselves to, right? Like Allah, the path of the Ahlul Bayt, our ulama, our urafa, this reality that leads us to Allah. All those things are what we attach ourselves to because it leads us to what is eternal and what matters for us and what we're really after. Perfection, eternal life, eternal pleasure and love and connection. But over here, none of that stuff is possible. And that's why we get so depressed and detached. So we have to make sure as parents, as brothers and sisters, and as children, even speaking to our elders, that we make sure we don't reflect this attachment to the dunya. Even in our words, we have to be careful. We speak about these things on spiritual terms. Let me give another narration attributed to Imam Sajjad alayhi salatu wasalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ala. And again, this is also reported in Shaykh Saduq's Al-Khisal. He says, because of lack of time, I'll just go through the English. Whoever is not calmed by what God has promised, whatever God has promised them, they would suffer from worldly losses. Right? The minute you're looking for things that is not in your rizq, why are you freaking out? By God, this world and the hereafter are like two sides of a scale. Whichever side is loaded more goes down, and the other side would get lighter and goes up. Think about this analogy. I'll give you the second part of the narration tomorrow, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We mentioned last night that our Imam, our Mawla, made his way to the masjid for Fajr, waking up everybody along his way, even the person who would lead to his untimely demise. He struck in sujood. The calls from Jibreel are heard in the skies. The narrations, it's interesting. They say that when the Imam was struck, when he struck with this heavy, heavy sword, a sword which was laced, according to some narrations, with so much poison They say that this same amount of poison would have killed everybody in all of Kufa. That's how much Ibn Muljam, la'anatullah alayh, that's how much poison he had put onto the tip of the sword. They say that when the Imam was struck on the head with this in his sujood, the only thing that you heard from the Imam, it wasn't a sigh of pain, it wasn't agony, it wasn't grief, there was no ouch or discomfort, nothing like that. The only words that they heard from the Imam at that point was Bismillah wa billah wa fi sabilillah fuztu wa rabbil Ka'bah. This is an ashiq of Allah. This is somebody who's in love with Allah, who, when they're talking in the best position to their Creator, somebody who says, I'm in the way of Allah, I'm in the path of Allah, and I swear by the Lord of the Kaaba that I won. That's victory for somebody. As soon as this took place, there was chaos in the masjid. Imam Hassan comes and takes his father. He sits down and takes the head of his beloved father and puts it down in his lap. Blood was pouring all down from the head of Amir al-Mu'mineen down to the head over the face of the Imam, covering it everywhere. Imam Hassan would bend down every once in a while and look and see what would happen, see what happened to his father, and see this profuse amount of blood coming down. And this would in turn cause Imam Hassan to start crying profusely. He's crying very, very loudly. Some of the tears fell on the face of Imam Ali. When he felt the tear of his son, he tried to open his eyes, he looked and he saw the face of his son. And he looked and said, Bunayya, Ya Hassani, are you crying? Please don't cry. There's no reason to cry. Why, Amir al-Mu'mineen? Why shouldn't your son cry right now? He says, don't you know, Al-An, right now, I'm with a group of people and they're all saying salam to me. They're all saying, Ilayya, Ilayya, marhaban, come to us, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. We've been waiting for you for so long. After Rasulullah passed, we've been dying for your company now. After Fatima passed, we've been dying for your company. Come now, Rasulullah is here waiting for you. Fatima is here waiting for you, come now. People started to hear the screaming and crying in the streets. When they came outside and they saw what had happened, they said the commotion was the same way. The commotion, the crying, the chaos in the streets was exactly the same as it was when Rasulullah passed away. And why shouldn't it be? This is the true Khalifa and the true Wasi and inheritor of the Prophet. The Imam joined the Jama'at prayer and told his son Imam Hassan to lead. So Imam Ali is in the first line towards the end, reciting the prayer, trying to follow his son Imam Hassan as he's leading. But they say, according to the narrations, because of the strength of the poison, because of the blood coming out, leaving his head onto his face, because of the overall weakness he's been facing, every once in a while, even though he was sitting down and offering prayers, he kept falling over and over again. He would have to pick himself up, Allahu Akbar, to continue his prayers, and would fall down continuously over and over again. I would say to our Mawla, Ya Mawla, like father, like son, don't you know that soon in the future in Karbala, your son Hussein will go through the same thing over and over again when he runs towards his son Ayul Akbar on the battlefield of Karbala. They say that the battlefield of Karbala caused Imam Hussein to fall down over and over again, and he would call out, Ya Ali, Ya Bunayya, don't you know what happens to a father when he sees his son leaving for the last time? How can I control myself? على لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad to forgive all mu'mineen, mu'minat, muslimin, muslimat. On these nights of Qadr, especially on tonight, accept all of our a'mal, our hajat, and give us the strength, the wisdom, and the power, the knowledge, everything that we need in order to perfect ourselves, our families, our friends, and grow together as a community. وآخر دعوان أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.